This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Hello, good evening, and welcome back, everybody, after that summer break. Well, if you could call it a summer. Certainly, if you lived in Northern Ireland, you saw plenty of rain. But I hope you all had a fantastic time. Now, my good wife, Dr. Donna, and I, we didn't get away, but we did enjoy some of the shenanigans you all got up to when we watched you on Twitter and Instagram. Goodness, you teachers out there are a creative lot, even on your holidays. Now, don't tell anybody, but there's a little thing called the Rugby World Cup coming up. Going to happen in Paris. Ireland are the world's #1 team. Everybody wants to beat them. Poor England are besotted with troubles. Now, stop turning off, you people. Listen on. So, maybe, just perhaps, maybe we'll get a quick run over to Paris and support Ireland in the Rugby World Cup. So if you get a chance and you see me there, don't be afraid to say hello. So tonight we kick off the new term with a cracking topic, and that is mobile phones in schools. My goodness, they are the bane of everybody. Now, a lot of schools back this week, and I would say everybody's back tomorrow, certainly on Monday. And primary school maybe, but certainly post-primary school, everybody will be worried and stressing about mobile phones. I know a lot of schools have decided that they're having a blanket ban. You're not even allowed your phone in school. You're not allowed any device where you can communicate. That'll be interesting to see how that goes, to talk about that. And tonight we have a really experienced expert, Emily Churkin, all the way from Seattle, who's going to tell us a lot about mobile phones, the problems, the difficulties, and how schools can manage mobile phones. So, without further ado, let's get to it.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Hello and good evening and welcome back after your great summer holidays, everybody. Emily, are you on the other end? I see you're joined up.
Yes, I am. I'm here. Can you hear me?
Oh my goodness, it's like you're in the room beside me. Yes. Yeah, you're coming along really clear. Excellent. Great. Yes. So Emily, you're in Seattle.
I am, yes. Other side of the world, almost.
Other side of the world is right. What is it now? It's about lunchtime with you,
It is, yes, about 1 p.m. So I'll have lunch after this.
Oh, good. And what's today? What's the weather like?
Oh, I'm afraid we're living up to our stereotype, a bit gray and cloudy. But you know, it's been lovely. I can't complain. We've had pretty reasonable summer weather here.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Yeah. Yes. Well, it's 9:00 here. I'm in Northern Ireland, and It's dark.
Yes.
It's dark already, and we were thinking about actually turning the heat on at one stage today.
Oh.
So yeah, the summer's really over, I suppose, and everybody goes back to school in a day or two. So
yes, here as well. We've had some schools start this week and some schools start next week. So it is the season.
Same here. Yes, same here. Yeah. So Emily, I don't know a lot about Seattle except for your absolutely wonderful program, Frasier. I love that show. In fact, there's a channel, still has it here. They broadcast 2 shows every morning, and they're all on catch up, and we absolutely love it. I think they did about 210 shows.
Oh my!
I think we've seen them all about 10 times. So
wow, it's more than I have. I have to admit, I've seen some, but I do believe most of it was not shot in Seattle, ironically. So
I would say yes. Some studio somewhere. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes,
Hmm.
yes. No, well, and I do have to admit my knowledge of Northern Ireland might be limited to the Dairy Girls series, which I loved.
Yes. Yeah. So you're a big fan of the show. Yeah.
I loved it, loved it, loved
Yeah.
it so much. Yes,
Yeah.
brilliant, creative, funny, smart. Yes, I loved it.
Yeah. It's amazing just how well that show travels. It struck a chord somehow, and it
Yeah.
travels really well. And the girls don't hold back on their accents or anything.
Yeah,
And
well, did you find that, well, like, was it authentically representative of what your experience in Northern Ireland is, would you say?
oh yeah, I taught plenty
Okay.
of girls like that.
Yes.
Believe me, I certainly did. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
wonderful,
No,
wonderful.
no, no. It's
Well,
very much very true reflection. Yeah.
oh,
And
good,
when we were
good.
talking yesterday, you mentioned about the music in the show as well.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
it's
yes. It was my high school. So the time period of the show is exactly
yeah,
I was the same age as those girls at that era. So
right.
it resonated that way as well. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
It's a great
wonderful.
creative piece. Yeah, coming out of Northern Ireland. But
Yes.
schools have changed
A bit,
nowadays,
a bit,
and
yes.
they certainly have changed a bit. And I think you suffer from some of the same problems we do, and
I,
that is you're trying hard to teach, and you've got
yes.
classes, you're trying hard to run and manage a school, and you do well with the children in front of you, and so on. But they all have
Yes.
handheld devices now. They've got mobile phones. They can
Yes.
record you, their concentrations up the left, or all sorts of things. And Emily, you have a
Yeah.
lot of experience about this. So, how does it come about that, this is an area of interest for you?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking. I did teach what we call middle school here, so
Yeah.
seventh grade, which is about 12 to 13-year-olds. And I did that for about 12 years. I started in the classroom around 2003.
Mm-hmm.
And, that, as you well know, was pre smartphone for children, pre social media. And even still, the tech use in school was pretty minimal, some word processing here or there. But
Yeah.
it was a very different world 20 years ago.
Sure.
And over the 12 years I spent in the classroom, I saw a very big change in a couple of ways. One primarily being the way in which students started to interact online initially outside of school, right? No student in 2005 was excited to have a cell phone because they
No.
were embarrassed. It's like, oh, my parents make me take this. They want to reach me all the time, kind of a thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, just 10, 12 years later, I left the classroom in 2015, and I surveyed my students before I left, and 95% of them had smartphones by that point, and
Mhm.
I live in Seattle, which is a pretty tech heavy city for sure, but it was pretty shocking to witness that big transition culturally, and just what it did to my students' social and emotional lives. It just things even that I had no awareness of. They'd come into school and talk about, oh, I got left out, or somebody posted this picture in a party I wasn't invited to, or somebody
Mhm.
started this Facebook group about how much they hate me. And it was like, whoa, I can't
Yeah.
ignore this. I can't pretend this isn't part of their everyday fabric of their
Mhm.
lives. It really, really had an impact. So, it was, as we say, the elephant in the room, and I just decided I had to talk about it. So, I fortunately had a school that was pretty supportive of me having those conversations with kids. And
Yeah.
the other piece of it that my students really taught me was that, this is our parents too. Our parents are on their phones, our parents are texting and
Mhm.
driving, our parents
Yeah.
are on social media. And so it was kind of a aha moment for me of like, oh, wait, this isn't a kid problem. This is a grown up problem that's affecting children. And so that became my drive to start working with parents primarily in schools, but to try to help educate them, because
Yeah.
that's the ripple effect, right? Like, what we do is what our children will do.
Yes, of course they will copy everything we do, won't they? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. The good, the bad, and
Yeah.
the ugly.
And the good, the bad, and the ugly, indeed. Yeah, yeah. But Emily, that sounds very good. That you addressed that, and you had a sympathetic school
Yeah.
that allowed you to address that. One of the things I always talk about, is that the whole child comes to school, the whole child comes up that avenue every morning. So,
Yes.
if there are social issues, if there are mobile phone, if there are social media issues, we do have to address them.
Yeah.
I think we educate the whole child. So, yeah, I'm glad to hear that happened. Yeah. Wouldn't have
Yeah,
happened in every
absolutely.
school here, but, most it
Yeah.
would. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, again, I'm speaking to my experience, which is now 7 years ago that I left the classroom, and it is a sea change since then as well. It's only gotten more of an issue, more access, younger
Yeah.
ages, more platforms, less oversight, right? Like, it's just, I had a parent tell me it's like holding back a tsuami with sandbags. You just can't, like, it just feels so overwhelming and so fast. So I'm with you that we cannot just teach content at the expense of all of the implications of the social and emotional dynamics, because stressed children don't learn.
Yeah,
So it's
exactly. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah.
we can't not talk about it.
Yeah, and we can't not talk about it is right. And I think we're better uh, address it head on rather than
Yes.
have it as an elephant in the room.
Yes, I
Yeah.
agree. And I think it really varies. Some schools are better about talking about it. Some schools want to pretend it doesn't exist. It really runs the gamut. And I talk to and I visit a lot of different schools, and it really does vary. I think
Hmm.
one of the things that really muddies the water is also the increased use of screen-based tech for learning and at school. And that can
Yes.
look
Yeah.
like a whole bunch of things. Initially as a teacher, I was asked to do a lot more of that for my teacher management side of things, grading online and posting assignments. And fully honest, I did not like it at first, and I
Of
still don't.
course.
That's my
Yeah.
bias still, but it became
Yeah.
even more challenging than when we started asking students to do that, right? And now they get devices from the school. So, we talk about the phone use for children, which is, yes, absolutely a huge issue, but it gets very complicated when that is also provided by the school, or the expectation is that children will access online materials for school, right? So then,
Yeah.
can teachers even talk about it without looking hypocritical, for example, right? Like, you tell me not to do this on my phone, but I'm being asked to do this on a school computer, right? So it's tricky.
It is tricky, yeah, but maybe that takes us right into the nitty gritty then of,
Yeah.
there is legitimate use, and there
Yes.
is, and maybe for want of a better word, like illegitimate use. So
Yes.
what do you feel, what do you see as the real problems of children having mobile phones in their hands in school time?
So the mobile phone in schools, to me, has multiple problems, right? I think there is simply the distracting factor, that if
Yeah,
it's there, it is a distraction. And I don't mean just to the child who owns it, it's a distraction to the children around them as well.
sure.
And to the teachers. I can't imagine trying to be a teacher today and having 25 kids in my room and trying to manage and police their personal devices while I'm also trying to teach content. That's never going to feel good or successful. So that, I have a lot of empathy for teachers who have to handle that.
Of
So
course,
it's the
yeah.
distraction, but then, I think there's equity issues. Not every kid has a phone, even though it feels like they do. It's still not the
Yeah,
case. I
yeah.
think it's a huge crutch for problem solving, for mental health resilience, for social skill development. I think kids turn to their phones to escape difficult feelings, which I
Yeah.
think is deeply problematic from the whole child development standpoint, right? We need kids to have those experiences. That's how they grow into resilient adults. um,
Definitely. Yeah.
and then that, in addition to all of that, the platforms they're using, the social media apps, the games, whatever it is they're using, and primarily it is for entertainment. It is not for, creative pursuits. Certainly some kids do that, but it tends to be a very
Mhm.
small minority. But it's the design itself. It's I know here in the US we refer to it as persuasive design, manipulative tech. I'm sure that's a universal concept and maybe just called different things, but it is how it is designed. It is designed to hook their attention and hold their attention. It taps into their neural pathways. So putting it down is not just simply a question of turn it off or stop. It is literally a hijacked neural pathway. So, you're not fighting the child, you're fighting a brain, chemical that's like holding them on. And so, forget about teaching. That's the battle becomes, how do I get them off? How do I keep them from using it? And, and I mean, I could go on. I think parents can complicate this a lot. I think their intentions are good. They want to be able to reach their kid. I will say, I think in the United States, we have the deep shame of school shootings that is driving a lot of parental fear about having access to technology. Parents feel that that's an important thing to send kids to school with because of that fear. And
I can understand that. Yeah,
I can too. And yet I know this is going to rub some people the wrong way. I feel like as awful, atrocious, appalling, embarrassing as it is that our country deals with that, it is still statistically a rare phenomenon. And the dangers that come from giving children unlimited access to social media, the internet, and phones is deeply dangerous and very common. So I think, the problem is our media and our politics will feed us these fear-based headlines that get our attention and raise our parental anxieties at the expense of thinking about, well, what are the things that really I can focus on that really do matter in the day-to-day lives of my children, and that takes a lot of adult courage to see and say that. But,
it does. And one of the things we'll maybe come on to, maybe later, what about the parent who does stand up and take a stand? They're very isolated. But Emily, if we could come back to one thing there.
Yes.
So as I listen to you then, would you see, trust issues between parents and schools?
Oh, yes. I mean, I think trust is a big challenge across the board, right? And it's, and I can only speak to my experience here in the United States, and we've had quite a bumpy ride the last few years with schools and parents and technology and children and mental health. And I feel like one of the big challenges is parents tend to get really riled up, perhaps about the things that they feel like they can control, and ignore maybe some of the things that actually are more realistically within their control. And I think what I'm getting at too is that there's just a lot of defensiveness around this issue for parents. I think they feel responsible, embarrassed, ashamed, concerned, and they are guilty themselves of using technology excessively. I mean, myself included. I'm not here to cast stones. I understand that. And I think there's confusion about what the schools are asking parents and children to do with digital tech that gets really confusing. And so I think the erosion of trust is there. But it's funny, I was taking some notes before this, and one of the words I did write down is that, trust is also so important for parents to have of teachers. I think the erosion.
Well, that's what I was getting at.
Yes. So, and I would differentiate between administration and districts and, policymakers and teachers, because I think teachers are caught very often between a rock and a hard place with what they're asked to do by their supervisors and what they know in their hearts is good teaching and learning. And the problem is, I think parents are well-intentioned, but most parents aren't teachers, It's like, I feel very uniquely privileged to have been both a teacher and a parent, and I see often in my own parenting peers a lack of knowledge about learning and child development and what's really important in a classroom. Because they just don't know, it's not, I don't walk into a surgical office and expect to know how to do surgery, right? Like I trust that the surgeons know what they're doing. And I'm afraid that we've taken away a lot of that trust of what teachers, no one goes into teaching for the money or the glory, right?
No, they don't.
And that's the thing. We've taken, I feel that there has just been a real shift away from trusting that teachers know how to do their craft, how to connect with children. And above, all else, I think the relationship between a teacher and a student is going to be what determines whether a child learns, and if we don't give them the opportunity to do that, it's not going to happen, right? And then it just becomes this self-fulfilling cycle of failure and test scores and all of this other stuff that then teachers get blamed for. So
of course,
I have a lot of empathy for teachers. I hope that's being conveyed.
Yeah, it certainly is, and we all do. Yeah. I suppose when I'm retired now, but it's only a year. But I would have had to deal a lot with mobile phone issues or technology issues or cyberbullying and all sorts of things that would happen. And occasionally you would have had a parent in your office and you would be speaking to them and talking to them, and it quite often would just come across very strongly that the parent is suspicious of what happens in the 6 hours a day.
Yes.
They may not have been able to voice it or say it, but there was a lot of kind of pulling down your character as a school, and you don't know what's what, and my child needs this mobile phone, and so on. And it would particularly gall me because quite often I taught the parents who were coming in.
Yes.
In fact, embarrassing as it is to say, I taught the grandparents.
Wow.
So,
wow.
I know. But my point is that those generations of families, they know the ethos of the school. They know the quality of care. They know the all-encompassing, educate the whole child, look after them. In 37 years in schools, I've never stopped a child from ringing home. In fact, I've often taken a child from a classroom up to the office, let them phone a parent, leave them on their own. They can say what they like and so on.
So, that's a big shift. Well,
and I just wonder how that sense of trust, and it's not even the loss of trust. It's a kind of suspicion arises.
And I think the tip of that iceberg is actually fear-based. I think parents are so afraid, and I'm not sure they could articulate what it is that they're afraid of. I mean, I can guess at a few things, but I think it's fear. And, I wonder, and when I was I was a very young teacher in my first few years, would I have had the confidence to say to a parent, especially one older than me, right? Like, I think you're afraid of something. What is that, right? Like, I'm not sure I would have had that ability, but I do wonder if it starts with, one of the things I say all the time is to replace judgment with curiosity. And I think one of the things, and this is true for parent to child relationship, parent to teacher, teacher to student, is that we get very judgy of each other, of our the motivations for why people might be doing something. And I think social media and technology enforces that, right? I think we're fed those messages. So our instinct is to now put up our fists, metaphorically speaking, or quite literally, and fight back, push back, defend myself, troll you before you control me. And unfortunately, that doesn't help anyone, especially not kids. And so, I guess what I feel like is, how do we help parents by finding out what it is they're afraid of, right? Like, and I think, my hunch is that parents that get in those offices and defend their children, it's hard to believe that their kid could do X, Y, or Z. And because there's such shame and embarrassment that might come with that, because they don't know how to handle it, because they feel maybe it was my fault that they did that and I didn't stop it. And, I'm here to say it's not our fault, but it's our responsibility. And what we want is kids to learn how to problem solve and take responsibility for things, like, we have to model that as adults. And, this is much broader than just mobile devices in school, right? I realize we're getting kind of meta here, for lack of a better
word. But I think
word.
you're absolutely right. No, I do. I think you're absolutely right. And of course, that brings teachers out of the classroom, out of the school. You're kind of educating the whole community.
Yes.
And, you're trying to say to parents and grandparents, limit the time on devices, be careful what they're at. Now,
Yes.
certainly in my school, you know, we didn't have a problem doing that. We might have
Yes.
had a little sense of discomfort doing it, but occasionally we did send out very strong messages to parents and so on. And,
Yeah,
it,
that's
you
good.
know,
And it has to be comprehensive. It can't just be, I
mhm,
mean, this is my view, right? I think I think you used the phrase blanket ban, for schools
mm,
that have these blanket bans of phones we sometimes call it away for a day, right? Like keeping your phone away for the day. But I think the challenge is if you have a policy like that, does it apply to everyone? Does it apply to the parents coming in? Does it apply to the
yeah,
teachers on campus or the
yeah,
administrators? If it doesn't, it's going to be much harder to enforce, to get student buy in, to see it as a common good for the community. And it gets hard to do that, I'm afraid.
yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. I'm curious. May I ask you a question about
Sure, of course, yeah.
what was sort of the biggest, from the beginning to the end in terms of what you saw from? I'm curious of what you see in students as decreased resilience and increased fear and anxieties. I know certainly in the U.S. we see the mental health. It's been documented that mental health is a very real thing for our teens. But would
Yeah.
you say you noticed that as well?
Very definitely.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
We've kind of shifted. You said, when you began teaching, I probably began quite a bit before you, but
Yes.
there weren't mobile phones or anything like that.
Right.
They didn't exist. And when you taught a class, you stood in assembly, you pretty
Yes.
much had attention, and it was up
Yes.
to you to hold it and win it, earn it over and hold it. And you pretty much could do that. But
Yes.
over time, these shiny devices came, and not only was the device shiny, but that device could instantly communicate with anyone,
Yeah.
anywhere in the world.
Right.
So you're busy standing there teaching French verbs,
Yeah.
and you're doing your damnedest, to do
Right.
your
You
best
can't
and so
compete.
on.
Yeah.
And you can't compete is right. That child's attention
Yeah.
is 100% somewhere else. And I
Yes.
think you're right. You alluded to it earlier. There are not only psychological, but I think there are psychiatric issues with it now, and they
Yes.
are along the lines of addiction.
Yes.
Psychiatric in the sense that the brain structures have changed,
Yes.
and
Very much.
children, they suffer withdrawal, they have big problems being away from their phone. And those problems are things like, fear, trauma, or at least they reflect,
Yes.
trauma, or they look similar,
Yes. Anxiety, depression. Yes.
anxiety,
Very much.
depression, and
Yeah.
so on. Yeah,
And I always say too that I'm not anti-technology. I'm tech intentional,
far
right? Like
from
it's,
it. Yeah.
and
Hmm.
like, again, like, look, I'm talking to you in Northern Ireland right now, right? Like this is
Mm.
amazing that what we can do. And I
Yeah.
think you asked earlier, like, well, I don't remember quite what your question was, but one thing I think where we can be more intentional about technology use for schools, whether again that's in the ed tech itself or in the student device policies, is putting skills before screens. That this is one of the things that I find is so backwards, is we give students. In fact, one of the students I worked with, who this was probably about 6 years ago at this point, so at the end of my teaching career, she came in and she's like, I was working as a tutor at that point. And she came in and she said, I've got a science assignment, right? And she pulls out an iPad because that's what they're using for school. And she's,
Sure.
going through all these different apps to try to find her homework and the reading assignment. And after all of this, and she's cutting and pasting answers from a search engine. And at the end, and I said, well, why are you, I'm sort of going, plagiarism, like, how does this work? Doesn't your teacher know
Yeah.
that you're copying and pasting? She goes, well, I don't know how to type. And I
Hmm.
was thinking, then why on earth do you have a device for school?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
again, could there be a device used for school at some point? And I have some opinions about what age that should happen. Yes, that's possible. But why are we giving it to them? It's backwards. You don't ask a baby to learn how to read before they learn how to crawl, right? I mean, there's
Yeah.
brain development stuff that needs to happen. So
Yeah.
again, I wish I could see a much more intentional alignment with development when it comes to the introduction of technology there are incredibly important skills children need about technology. And this, again, could be applicable to personal devices or school devices. But, thinking about critical thinking skills, right? How do we know if a site or a person online is who they say they are, or that the quote isn't fabricated or the image isn't altered, right? Like, these are going to be fundamentally very important skills for children to have as they grow up in this increasingly digitized world.
Definitely, yeah. So you've thought a little bit about, the age and stage at which devices should be given to
Yeah.
children. Is that right? Well, tell us a
Yeah.
bit more about that, Emily.
Well, I always get asked, at what age should I get my kid a phone? What's the first age I should give it to them? And I always say, later is better, delay as long as possible, because I have talked to hundreds of parents, and never, not once, has a parent ever said to me, I wish I'd given my kid a phone sooner. It is always the opposite. I wish I'd waited. And I think one of the things I feel is I always hear, I often hear from parents with kids, older than 10 years old. And what I wish I could do is hear from parents of kids younger than 10, because it's like, you don't know. There's sort of a perfect storm that happens, that you here in the States, we enter middle school around age 10, 11, 12. You're hitting puberty. It's when a lot of other kids are getting phones, increased independence. And, bang, you hit this. And as a parent, you might have, this is what I see all the time. These parents of younger kids think they have it figured out. They've been limiting screen time. They've been so intentional. Everything's humming along. And then, you just hit this. I say it's like an avocado. It's like not ripe, not ripe, not ripe. Too late.
That's very good.
And it's like, you just get blindsided by it. And even, again, myself included, I thought I had it all figured out. And then, with my kids in particular, we had COVID happened and lockdown, and all of that interrupted all of it anyway. And in some ways it was a blessing in disguise, because my son was entering those middle school years right when he went into lockdown. So he wasn't around the peer pressure of having phones, but he was online for learning, which was a different problem. So it was a very mixed experience. So, I always say to parents, and this is rather shocking, but I think it's accurate, is like, get them a phone when you're ready for them to see pornography, for example. Like, if you're not ready to talk about that, they're not ready to have a phone, because again, they're not seeking it out. I mean, how many of us have gotten spam messages or accidentally Google searched something and, boom, it's just there. And I think I'm being a bit cheeky, but I really think the conversational piece of this has to be a part of that decision. And if you're not ready to talk about that, they're not ready to have it. But also, to be clear, they're going to see it anyway. They're going to get it through their friends' phones, And so, I'm afraid parents aren't off the hook on this. This is now a non-optional conversation, starting from pretty much the time they interact on any sort of digital device. And I think that is something parents aren't really equipped with, right? It feels like too much too soon, but I always ask parents, like, what would you rather them learn about it from you or from a YouTube?
Well, I think those are some very harsh, in a good way, very stark questions that you're asking. And I'm listening to you on a radio show, and that first question brought me up abruptly,
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And again, it's not even, kids are naturally curious, right? And again, I can think of so many examples. Like, my son was really into Harry Potter, of course, at age 8 or 9, and he wanted to look up, he wanted a scarlet colored robe for, a Harry Potter outfit. He looked on our, Amazon, and, you type in the word scarlet robe and you get lingerie.
See where you're going.
And again, I'm sitting there with him doing it, and I was just, my jaw dropped. Oh my gosh, I didn't even think about that. Right. So again, it's often through an innocent question. And, we just have to be, it's a side-by-side partnership, parenting in the digital age. There's so much tension and stress around it, and we have to move away from the battles and move towards the fighting with or fighting for our children, as opposed to fighting against them.
So to stick with parents a minute, because I
Yes.
think, to look at, those issues and whether providers are responsible, that's probably a whole other show. But to
Yes.
stick with parents, where are the sources of pressure on parents?
Hmm. Yes. To provide mobile devices, you mean?
Yes, yeah, to give in, to
Yeah.
yield, to just collapse and yeah.
Well, I think parent peer pressure for sure. I always say parenting is the judgiest sport I've ever played.
Yeah.
Because, it's all like as a parent, and I'm 45, so I'm a end of Gen X, beginning of that millennial generation.
Yeah.
And I grew up a very analog childhood, right? And so I came to digital, especially social media when I was a parent of a newborn, right? And Facebook was coming
Yeah.
out, and I was interacting with all my mom friends and mom groups online. And we were constantly comparing, is your kid doing this? Is your kid doing that? And on the one hand, it was great to feel support. I'm not alone. I have all these people I can count on. And then it quickly also became a deep insecurity of like, oh my gosh, so and so's kid's doing that, but my kid's not, right? This
Yeah.
was 15 years ago. It's only magnified. And now our kids are doing it, right? So I think parent pressure from peers via social media is a huge part. I think culturally, there's a lot of pressure on parents, but in particular mothers, to do all, be perfect, have a career, be a great mom. That's problematic.
I
And I
think we
think,
see
yeah,
that lately. Yes, it used
yes,
to be it would have been the child, and
yes,
the child would have said, "Oh, so and such is getting a mobile phone."
yes, for sure.
We're moving from primary school to secondary school, elementary to middle
Yes,
school or whatever. Everybody'll have one. I'll be left out. But I
yes,
think, yes, I think that's another change I would have seen in recent times.
mm,
You get this
yes,
kind of sense of one-upmanship.
absolutely.
My child will have a better phone than all those other children in that
Oh, yes.
class.
Oh,
You
yes.
know?
Yes,
Yes, I think
very
we've seen
much.
that. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah,
that was the last thing I was going to add, was that there's also the pressure from kids, and but here's the
yeah,
thing, like
yeah,
I said to my parents 30 years ago, well, my everybody else has this pair of jeans or this bare brand of shoes, and it's some of this is developmentally completely normal for children to say these things. But the difference
yeah,
is, I think parents feel a different level of pressure to give it, to provide it. They're made to feel that we can't live without it. A lot of families don't have landlines in their homes anymore. So what
no,
used to be a way to communicate isn't available. But and I should say that that's also one of the biggest complaints I hear is like, well, I don't want to give my kid a phone, but that's how their friends are communicating. Like, how are we
yeah,
supposed to
yeah,
solve this? I actually
yeah.
have a very unique solution for that I've solved with my
Oh,
own daughter, which is
mm-hmm.
we share a phone. So she uses my phone number. She's 12 now, entering middle school
Okay.
here. And for
Mm-hmm.
the last year, I mean, the poor kid has me as her mother. So we've talked about this for years. So she knows it's coming, but I do feel like,
Yeah,
she's been very well informed. And in some ways, this experience has been so powerful for both of us because, she can text as many people as she wants. It's all, we because it's an Apple product, of course, she can do it from a tablet and I can do it from a
yes,
phone. And so that helps give her a
yes.
little independence. But I can see everything. She can also see
Okay.
what I type, though. And so,
Yeah, yeah,
parents sometimes are like, well, that's my private text messages. But then I say, nothing's private on the internet. You shouldn't assume
yeah,
that your texts are private, even if your child's not looking at them. So,
yeah.
it's a good lesson
I
for all of us.
I like that. I like that. I'm not sure how many people here in Northern Ireland or the UK would take that up because I think there'd be a lot of fears on the part of parents. But
Yeah, and well, it's a
a
good
super
first step.
solution. Yeah,
It's a
yeah,
first step too, and I
yeah,
don't want to say that it work. I know it won't work for every parent-child duo, but I
yeah,
think there are benefits to it, and it's it is working for my family right now. I'm very willing to say that in a year that might not be the case.
Yeah, yeah. But I
Yes.
suppose what I hear you talking about, or what I hear you saying there, really is, about keeping the relationship between you and
Yes.
your daughter very much open, very much two-way, very much
Yes.
full-on trust,
Yes.
and
Yes.
so on.
Yes,
Emily,
that's it. That's it. Yeah.
we need to take a short break now, and
Okay.
we're going to listen to the news. We'll be right back after these messages, everybody.
Okay.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Hello, good evening, and welcome back, everybody, after that summer break. Well, if you could call it a summer. Certainly, if you lived in Northern Ireland, you saw plenty of rain. But I hope you all had a fantastic time.
It's time for a fresh start to language learning. Pearson EdXL's new student-centred French, German and Spanish 2024 GCSEs cater to the needs of all learners, regardless of their background, ability or reason for studying. Rooted in learned language knowledge, their assessments are transparent and accessible, allowing all students to showcase their language skills. Through inclusive and relatable content, the new Pearson EdXL MFL GCSEs build a shared cultural capital that helps students develop an understanding of and appreciation for the wider world. Find out more at go.pearson.com/MFL GCSE 24.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
BBC News reports on GCSE results and the impact resits in English and Maths could have on post-16 providers. According to figures it has published on the news website, over 167,000 pupils in England received grade 3 or below in maths, whilst 172,000 failed English language. The number of pupils not achieving grade 4 in English language is highest for a decade. The Association of Colleges has estimated that the extra GCSE resits could cost around £16 million for the year, and highlighted the yo-yo effect the pandemic has had on resits, making planning a huge challenge. Julie McCulloch of Education Union ASCL said resits were demoralising for students and reform of English and Maths qualifications was badly needed. Last year, only 20% of those retaking a Maths GCSE achieved grade 4 or above. The BBC also reported on GCSE pass rates in England, Wales and Northern Ireland as falling. The drop was steepest in England, but in Wales and Northern Ireland, grades were always meant to be higher. Analysis on the news website also indicates that in England, the gap between regions with lowest and highest proportions of GCSE passes has grown, and that state schools had a steeper fall in pass rates than in private schools. Schools Week features a story on A-level results and the widening attainment gap between North and South. According to data published on its website, the North East now has the lowest proportion of A star and A grades, lower than pre-pandemic levels, at 22%. At the same time, London and the South East have recorded the biggest rises when compared to 2019. Labour's Shadow Schools Minister said the results showed the failure of the government's levelling up agenda. The article discusses a range of factors which could contribute to the disparity across the best and worst performing regions, including existing long-term deprivation exacerbated by the pandemic, food insecurity made worse by the current cost of living crisis, and more usual factors such as attendance, device access and the use of catch-up schemes. Full details can be found on the Schools Week website. The Guardian also takes a look at academic outcomes for pupils, this time through the lens of those referred to social services during childhood. It states that data suggests these pupils are twice as likely to fail GCSE Maths and English than other pupils. Data from a 3-year period found 53% of teens who had been referred to social care did not achieve a grade 4 pass in both the GCSE subjects. This is in contrast to 24% in those not subject to a referral. The analysis was carried out by the charity Action for Children. It is the first study to examine data for children with a referral rather than just those who receive support. Around 318,000 children a year are referred to social care, although many do not meet thresholds to receive support. The Guardian also featured comments from school leaders on the impact high levels of absence and poor mental health of pupils have had on outcomes for some. Many cited a lack of formal support for pupils and their families, contributing to further strains on school staff as they tried to plug gaps usually filled by other services such as social care and the NHS. Following on from its examination of regional disparity in academic outcomes across different regions, Schools Week also reports on proposals for elite sixth forms being given the go-ahead. The Eton Star 16 to 19 free schools, a collaboration between Eton College and Star Academies, will open in Dudley, Teesside and Oldham. This is part of the 15 new free schools announced by government in the last week. The aim is to improve education standards and get more pupils from the North and Midlands to Oxbridge. The Sixth Form Colleges Association has, however, warned that more sixth forms could lead to existing high-performing provision being unnecessarily disrupted. Eton College will provide financial and extracurricular support through its partnership with STAR. Education Secretary Gillian Keegan commented on the 15 new schools, saying, "We want to make more good school places available to families." The 15 schools also include 2 new university technology colleges, the first to be approved in 5 years, and a Brit School North to be opened in Bradford. The sixth form sector has reacted to the new plans, saying that in the 55 education investment areas, there are already enough colleges and school sixth forms in the areas to meet need. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Jo Fox.
It's time.
Hello and welcome back. Emily, are you there? Can you hear me?
I'm here, yes.
Great. So, Emily, we're running out of time on what's turning out to be a very hot topic.
Yes.
And I'm sure a lot of teachers in fact, I would say across the planet, are busy stressing about mobile phones and their use and their misuse and so on today. So do you have any specific solutions or anything that could be applied to schools?
Yes, in terms of mobile device management, I think, certainly a blanket ban is an important start. And, I would encourage any school exploring that to approach it as universally as possible. So if teachers are using their personal devices to text one another during the day, I can see that as a tool, right? I can see why teachers might do that. Is there an alternative? Because it is very difficult to ask students not to do that when teachers are going to do that in front of them. And, I think it contributes to the culture as a whole that we are doing this together. This is us as a community wanting to make our community better. So any approach to, decreasing mobile use needs to apply to all of the school community, right? That would be one of my first tips. I also think it's really valuable to invite kids to be a part of the process in making those decisions. I always feel like kids are in a beautiful way, very egocentric. So they want to know why it matters to them or why it applies to them or why they should care. And so how can you include them in conversations about, digital tech? And I use the phrase go backward to go forward, right? So maybe it's not eliminating them first. Maybe it's a conversation as a school community, as teachers in classrooms, whatever, to say well, what's working about this and what isn't? What do we wish were different? What's hard about having devices at school? What is good about it? I mean, again, I don't want it to, we have to avoid being too biased. On the other hand, I will say that the research backs it up over and over again that it's better for kids to not have them at school. So, it's a little bit like, you don't need to try to convince them of it. I think kids are often underestimated at how smart and capable they are and insightful they are. And so sometimes just letting them articulate it and say, that's a great idea, let's try that, right, is going to be a lot easier than saying, here's the top-down approach we're going to implement. So I have lots of ideas.
Because I think one of the things schools really want to do, they want to avoid conflict, and certainly that head-on kind of conflict that you do tend to get And
Yes.
you might get it initially with the child in the corridor or the classroom or something, but very
Yes.
quickly.
Yeah.
In fact, here the child could go to the toilets immediately, and the parent could arrive
Yep.
within minutes,
Yep.
and you have more conflict. So I think schools want to avoid conflict,
Yes.
but they
Yes.
want to be able to use technology well. As you said, it's a very important tool for
Yeah.
learning. It's going to be a lot of people's livelihoods in the future as well.
But again, I think, and you know this as a teacher, like as I said, it's the skills first, right? So, even
Yeah.
leading employment, people who like look at future employment, yes, there are going to be technological skills required, but they're not going to be the skills that these children learned in second grade or when they were 10. It's going to be skills like relationships. How do you communicate with your colleagues? How do you problem solve? How do you deal with challenging coworkers? That is going to determine a child's success. The beautiful thing about technology is it's becoming easier and easier to learn. And so there isn't a need to do it when they're 5 years old. I mean, there's a value in introducing things slowly and in developmentally appropriate ways, and for entertainment. I get it. I mean, there are fun things you can do, but I don't believe it's a requirement. I don't believe it's a must. That far more important are the relationships and the people skills and the executive function skills that need to be in place. I always joke, when I learned, the computer game Oregon Trail was popular when I was in elementary school, but I don't use those skills in my tech life today, right? Like what's relevant now is going to be very different in 10 years. So kids can learn it. They will learn it, right? And so anyway, all that is to say is like it will come and it can be there. And you're right, it is the future, but it isn't at the expense of all of the things that we know do matter for healthy adulthood and learning and children.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. So, what's is there anything electronic? Is there any technological way of managing this kind of technology? I do remember that our technology department got
Yes.
hold of a blocker or something, some kind of signal blocker. So, the children hated being up in technology because their phones didn't work. And obviously
Yes.
the staff didn't say they had a signal blocker. They said, "Oh,
Sure.
it's just a dead area in the building or something like that." But
Sure.
I'm just wondering,
Yeah.
is there a technological way?
I
It's
I
not
have a
really a
very
technological
yeah.
problem, but
Well, I think that is often the solution that people search for, and it is not going to be the one we hope it will be. Because,
yeah.
first of all, I always ask parents, who programmed the VCR when you were a child, right? It was us, it was the kids. The kids are
Yeah.
always going to find the workaround. I hear this every single day. And it's not just from parents, it's the kids on their school computers or at school. Like they know how to get around it. So that doesn't, I call it digital whack-a-mole. I don't know if you have that game in the UK, but
we know the game.
So I call it digital whack-a-mole because it's like you try to block one thing and it, another thing's going to pop up, new platforms constantly. So it's not to say, and this is true for parents and parental controls, it's not to say that those can't be one tool in your toolkit. But when we rely only on those, we are setting ourselves up for disaster because it cannot be it's not the silver bullet we want it to be. And so, I wish there were, I have in fact an essay on 10 reasons why I don't recommend that approach. And at the end of the day, it comes back to relationships, communication, talking about why it's in alignment with the values of the school or of a family, and I think humility on a part of adults who are guilty and complex in their own use of tech, and coming together again.
I think that's so true, Emily. I do. I think it's so true that this comes down to a fundamental personal and interpersonal thing.
Yes.
The phone doesn't work or operate itself.
Yes.
It's the child operating it. It's the parent operating it. And then it's how they respond, when they're caught using it inappropriately and so on. And then it's a question of how does that individual, or somebody like me in a school, how do they react? Are you aggressive? Are you impatient? Are you punitive or whatever?
Right.
One of the difficulties, I used to find as a school leader and manager is, well, you've got you and you've got your good staff you can rely on and
Yeah.
so on and so forth, but you've got 550 or more children and they've all got phones, and it's really
Yes.
difficult to, there's just so much of a wave of a
Yeah.
tsunami to
Yes.
deal with, because you deal with one, you deal with it successfully, but you walk around the corner and there's
Well, that's
another phone issue.
that's the whack-a-mole, right? I mean, it's
That
just
is the whack-a-mole.
constant. And, I always say, like, books don't have algorithms, like paper is not going to have a loop of, ongoing video feeds, right? And so I know I sound old school and old fashioned perhaps, but we have decades of research about what children need to learn best, and none of it requires technology. Again, that's not to say it can't be introduced as a tool in very intentional ways, but especially for young children, it's not needed. And so young children do not need social media. Children, even middle school, high school age, do not need phones. They want them and they feel pressured to have them. And I understand that. But, it's going to take some courageous adults to say no and set limits and start modeling it, right? Like that's the other piece of it.
I think that's what it does, yes. And there is that fear, and we've talked about it already, that, if you don't allow your child a mobile phone, you are going to kind of separate them out and, you're going to cause them issues and problems. Yeah.
Well, and there's a wonderful story that was shared with me by an ed psych person recently about a school of fish, right? How does a school of fish know when to change direction in the ocean, right? They're swimming along, and how do they know? Yeah. And it takes a fish, one, to peel away and to shift that momentum. And not just one fish, but actually 2, 3, and 4 need to follow before the entire group will follow. And of course, I'm a former English teacher, so of course I'm ending here with a metaphor. But how do we become those first fish? What is it going to take for us as teachers, schools, parents to be the first fish? I am going to be the unpopular parent who says no or delays my kids' access. They do have it. They have some, but what is it going to take for a school to be that first fish? And it's going to be hard, but you have to find your second, third, and fourth fish to go along with you too. Yes.
Well, I think those are human qualities, that are hard to, the courage and so on.
Yes.
Emily, we are nearly out of time. We've got one more question left. As is traditional now on this program, I ask, if you had a magic wand and only one spell to cast, what change would you make to education that would significantly improve the lot of teachers? Now, Emily, I'm going to give you a minute to think about that, because we just need to listen to these messages. We'll be right back after this.
For a fresh start to language learning, Pearson EdXL's new student-centred French, German and Spanish 2024 GCSEs cater to the needs of all learners, regardless of their background, ability or reason for studying. Rooted in learned language knowledge, their assessments are transparent and accessible, allowing all students to showcase their language skills. Through inclusive and relatable content, the new Pearson EdXL MFL GCSEs build a shared cultural capital that helps students develop an understanding of and appreciation for the wider world. Find out more at go.pearson.com/MFL GCSE 24.
This is...
So, Emily?
Yes.
You are... you've got magical powers. Maybe you're Hermione. You've got a magic wand and only one spell to cast. What spell would you cast that would significantly improve the lot for teachers?
Well, we touched on it earlier, and the answer I would give is to unstandardize education so that we can allow teachers to do what they do best and to trust them, because we talked about trust, that kids will be okay even if things are slightly different from class to class, because we know that they learn best when they feel connected to their teacher and they are inspired by their teacher. And that's going to look a little bit different for each teacher. So that's what I would do with my magic wand.
That sounds really great. Yeah. I'm all on for those kind of changes. Yeah, and I think we learned a lot, from lockdown and the closure or partial closure of schools, and I think we've just gone back to a kind of a way now, and we've kind of thrown out or we've not kept some of the positive and good things that we learned from lockdown.
Yeah.
And that might be one of them, just a return to a much more
Yes.
human kind of interaction that would build the
Yes.
trust and courage that we've been talking about.
Yes. Yes, I agree 100%. Teachers
Yeah.
are really important.
They are indeed. They are vital. Yeah.
Yes.
Emily, it has been a great pleasure talking to you. You sound
Thank
really
you.
clear. It's so hard to believe that you're thousands and thousands of miles away. But
Yes.
Emily, you've been a magnificent guest.
Thank
We've learned
you.
a lot, and I
Thank
hope schools
you.
can begin to implement some of the ideas and thoughts that you have.
Thank
you very much.
Yes, thank you for having me. Have a wonderful day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.